Is the heart the most misunderstood part of the body?
Well, I don't know. I think the heart we understand is the cardiovascular organ, but what we don't know is all the other things that it does. Most people have no idea about that. So, not misunderstood, but maybe misinformed.
I mean, I feel like we also have such a metaphorical and artistic understanding and view of the heart that it can kind of blind us or lead to that misinformed view of it. I mean, where do you think that metaphorical and artistic view of the heart really comes from?
Well, I think first of all, the heart has been romanticized, in a way. But if you go back historically and look all the way back for thousands and thousands of years, all the ancient writings referred to the heart as a source of intelligence, and they revered the heart. I mean, this goes back into ancient cultures. The earliest writings I've ever seen about it were 4,500 years ago. Ancient Chinese medicine referring to it as an intelligence pumping its vital rhythmic messages, through the veins and arteries. That was like 4,500 years ago. In the late 1600s, a physician in the UK, Dr. William Harvey, came along. And he was the first guy to really like do us all the great service. He figured out that the heart was this four-chambered organ pumping blood, and he mapped it out. And so that was very important for medical reasons. But as people have reported on his work, they have said that when he introduced that understanding, that heart lost its thought and that thought lost its heart. And so we began to look at the heart through the process of medical reductionism and began to see it as an four-chambered organ pumping blood, but it had nothing to do with intelligence. But Tim, what I find interesting about that is even with that understanding, there's all these references that have continued for a really long time about the heart being more than that. People say things all the time like that team plays with so much heart.
Mm,
Let's put your heart into that, and you'll probably get some results. That kind of thing. When we point to ourselves, where do we point? We
mm.
point right here. We point up here. So are these just societal programs that we all sort of operate in, or is there something else going on that's more intuitive than that? I think the latter is what's true. That we sense something more about the heart than it being simply an organ that pumps blood.
Yeah, I find that really interesting, but I feel like we still, to a degree, we put more focus onto the mind as like we detach from the mind or see it as its own entity, as like separate to us. I think maybe we do that with our heart to a degree, but on a more like what you were saying, romanticized, sort of poetic view. I mean, why is it so important getting into the pragmatic? Why is it so important to put that same type of appreciation onto the heart that we do the mind?
Because the heart is really helping us to access a field of information that goes beyond the limits of our logic, linear intelligence. In today's world, as complex as it is, as many challenges as we face personally, societally, and globally, we have to have a new way of looking at things, a new intelligence. What I've learned in my many years of experience with this is that the heart provides a bigger bandwidth, so to speak, of understanding. Allows me to see into things differently. It offers new perspectives, hopeful ones. It doesn't just lock me into the problems that I see. It offers some suggestions around what to do. Um, it's something you tune into. It's there. Most people don't slow down the mind enough to listen to anything the heart would have to say, right? People live from the roar of ambition and survival, the speed of everything going so fast, and just the mind's going like this all the time, and what heart, it's not even considered. But when we find ourselves, everyone really, in these moments when we do slow down, and that happens sometimes when we are faced with a challenge that we don't have an answer for, you know, something that's really big and we can't figure out what to do. In those situations, what I find is that most people, including me, will slow things down and go a little deeper. For some people, it's something like praying, prayer. For others, it could be meditation. For somebody else, it could be a walk on the beach or in the woods or just getting in the car, and driving off, in the middle of the night going, I got to figure this out, but I don't know how. And what they're doing really is digging a little deeper, slowing down the racing mind and emotions and looking for something inside themselves that they might not call it heart, but they know there's something there and they're looking for a contact with that place within themselves so they can find some kind of answer to something, right? And very often the answer doesn't just show up as this big epiphany because the problem is huge, right? It's something big. But what I do find is that the sort of inner dialogue can start to shift. We begin to say things to ourselves like, I've been through tough situations before and I got through them. I don't know how I'm going to get through this one, but if I've done it before, I can do it again, right? That's a difference in perspective. It's offering at least hopeful possibilities, even though it's not saying, well, do this and do that and do this, and it's all going to go away. That would be unrealistic. But it can offer that moment of insight that gives us the resilience that we need to begin to find solutions.
So, do you think that thoughts, and I don't know if you've done research on this, so it's like partly me asking in a real physical way, but it's also in a rhetorical way. I mean, do you think thoughts can start in the heart rather than starting in the mind?
Well, that's a pretty big question, Tim. It is one of those which came first, the chicken or the eggs kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting, and I don't have a definitive answer. What I do think, though, is that we assign all intelligence to the brain and the mind, and the brain and the mind are absolutely amazing, right? So naturally, we assign significance to that, is where all thought comes from. But non scientifically, what I found in my own life's experience is that the entry point for some of this, I would just call it higher intelligence capacity that we have, actually happens in the heart. It's transmitted at super high speed to the brain, where it coalesces itself into the thoughts and the feelings and all that we experience. So the brain's getting credit for it. But where did it come in? Where did it enter us as a being, as a person? I think it's the heart. So the thoughts in the heart, whether it's from the head first and then the heart, or the heart first and the mind, I don't know. I just think that the impetus for some of that higher intelligence that the heart gives us access to is what's most important.
Yeah, I mean, the term mind body connection has played a big role within my life, and I think that term mind body is gaining a lot of traction within the world and our culture today.
Yeah.
But by understanding your work and being exposed to your work, what I've realized is I feel like there also needs to be a great appreciation for the terminology of heart mind connection, because I don't think we have any type of understanding or appreciation for that.
Well, that's where science came into play. Many years ago when we started heart math, we recognized, okay, we're trying to introduce a heart-based system into a relatively heartless world.
Mm.
And that had been talked about before, plenty for thousands of years, but mostly philosophically or spiritually. And so we wanted to take heart out of the confines of like philosophy, which is respected, and put it into daily practice, into right in the street, so to speak, where we live. And to do that, we recognized we need to do it differently. And so what we chose is to go through a scientific methodology to build a bridge between these sort of natural intuitive understandings that people have and something that was solid and understandable. And what I found with science is that when something is proven through science, empirical science, it increases the power of belief. Science says, therefore I can believe. So it increases the power of belief. So we chose a scientific route to begin to look at proving out, starting with the physical heart, that it was doing more than pumping blood, giving credence to some of the things that had been said about it for a long time.
I want to dive deeper into all the specifics of that, but what I always have an appreciation for is, or what I'm always curious about is, okay, when somebody does work, like how does that person actually get to that point of, okay, this is the work that I'm going to do? And I think you have a really interesting backstory about how you've gone to your work with heart math, especially in your younger life. In your past life, you were a big rock drummer, and you played with people like Bob Seger and bands like Leonard Skinner. What did that type of life teach you about the relationship between the head and the heart?
Um, well, I think what happened to me along the way is parallel tracks. Through back then, a long time ago, when I was your age, that's what I did for a living. I was a rock drummer, and that's what was up for me. And It was a stimulating life, but a very complicated one. It had ups and many, many downs. It was, hugely challenging in many, many ways. But when you're young, you don't really care about that. You're going for the ambition, and certainly had enough glamour in it for me that it was cool. But in the music world back then, in the late '60s, early '70s, there was some spiritual stuff starting to slip in. If you go way back in time, it was like you may not remember this, but the Beatles, they got into Maharishi and all this stuff. So there was this little bit of merger between music and spiritual thing was happening. That began to intrigue me. So I began to look into that, look at a few books and things, read some things, and it was really cool. And then I met Doc Childre, who's the man who founded HeartMath. He was just a few years older than me, but he had an awareness I didn't have, and that was something that I was drawn to. And basically, as we became friends, he began to introduce me to the concept of heart. And he's definitely not a touchy-feely kind of guy, and I certainly wasn't as a rock drummer. But I thought about all the things I'd been reading, and they often refer to the heart as something really special. Many things were leading people back to this understanding of heart. So I thought, well, why not give it a shot? Let's take a look at it. So I began to pursue some things from a more heart-centric approach. It took a while, but over time, what I found was my appetite for certain things in life changed. A lot of the sides of the music business were no longer savory to me anymore. Some of what was glamorous at one time was not anymore, and it began to feel rather mundane. And then I'd have other thoughts recognizing how self-centered what I was doing was. This was all about me. This was all about the spotlight. This was all about, clap for me, And I thought, this is just not probably the real goal I have in my life. And those thoughts and feelings got stronger and stronger, and very difficult to act on them because you're addicted to something. You're addicted to the music world, and very difficult to just move out of that and do something else. But it finally reached a point where there were business decisions happening that forced me to make some choices. And I recognized that some of the business decisions I was being asked to make were going to hurt other people. And I just felt like, you know what, there's something about this that's just not feeling right to me anymore. It's time for me to consider something else. And so it was a tough decision. I don't want to sound like a wimp, compared to what people go through today, but to say to yourself at age 30 something, early 30s, with no other career background, something you've had some success in, even though it's been up and down, that you're going to walk away to do what? And you don't know, right? So I had to take the leap of faith in a sense and say, I'm going to unplug from this whole thing. I'm going to walk away from it, and I'm going to take a look at life and see what else is out there for me. I was not immediately rewarded by that decision. It was a tough road down to go from all of that down to nothing, and ended up, in minimum wage jobs, after having had that other experience. It was rather humiliating in many ways. But over time, it began to make sense, and I was what I call first things first. I put my own growth at the forefront of what I was about, and let the external stuff sort of revolve around that. Over time, it led to, through my association with Doc and other people, when HeartMath was started at the very beginning, I was invited to be a part of it. So today, here we are, you and I on a podcast, and 30 some years later in HeartMath, and all I've gotten to do and to become an author of successful books, to a speaker, travel the world doing that, be able to do what I love the most, and all those kind of things. I look back at it now and go, that was a pretty smart decision. It's like I would be trapped in the music business now, just an aged rocker, living in the past, And instead, I feel like I'm living more in the now, and certainly excited about the future. And I don't know many people that can feel that way. So at the end of the day, smart move. But I tell the whole story to you today, Tim, because I know many people are looking for their purpose. They want to know what they're doing. People in your age range still a bit unsure about what the future is going to be, even in the world today, and what they're going to do in it, and how they're going to be associated with what's going on in the world. Big questions. Short answer for me is I listened to and followed my heart. And over time, it worked out. And I couldn't be happier with having made that decision. I don't live in the past about, oh, I used to be this and used to be that. And oh, yeah, I played with him and I played with her and all that. I don't even think about it. I've got too many other things in my life that are fulfilling that I don't have to go back in time to try to find fulfillment.
I love that, and I love that we were able to talk about that backstory because I think it's so important to the work and the philosophy behind your work that you do today. I mean, like in the present moment when you were going through that, and like you said, the road down, and you're working those minimum wage jobs. Do you still have an appreciation for, I'm tapping into my heart here? Like, did you even have that type of language or that type of consciousness of, hey, I'm tapping into my heart and my intuition here? Or is that more of a reflective process for you?
No, it's moment to moment, day to day. I have to live my life that way. I have a lot to do, a lot of complexity, as a business executive and a frontline spokesperson for a successful organization. That is always moving, always changing, always has, different angles and different challenges that are associated with that. So it's a moment to moment, day to day thing with me of trying to keep that connection going. And I'm not sitting there analyzing, well, is this my head? Is this my heart? Is this
Yeah.
intuition? Whatever. It's more of a flow, you know.
Mm.
But I know that when things feel a little rocky, I can sense that I'm not connecting deep enough. I need to back off here for a few minutes and find that place inside again. I'm letting life run me more than I'm running it right now. Let me try to find a balance in that. And so it's an ongoing thing for me. It never stops.
If somebody's like listening to that and they're like, I want that to to know that, I feel like a lot of the time, and I resonate with it, you really can't put language to it, but it's more so of just like it's a deep knowing and a deep feeling. And this is getting into your work with heart coherence. Like, how do people tap into that?
Well, at HeartMath, there are many things we offer. And one of the things I'm going to suggest to your listeners right now is check out the HeartMath app. We created a really cool app that measures heart brain body communication. It scores it for the degree of a term we haven't talked about yet, how coherent you are,
Hmm.
how connected and heart coherent you are. In addition, within that app, there's a suite of learning experiences. All the heart math techniques are there. They're guided weekly journeys, they're videos, there's courses. The whole thing is just full of learning. So you've got an app that provides both measurement and learning, which is rare. So, and people can get it from their favorite app store. Just download the Heart Math app. It's got a 7-day free trial. Easy in, easy out if you didn't want it. But check it out. That's one thing. Now, in addition to that, I mentioned some of the things about that are in the app, but heart math is a lot of things today. But we are, in one way of looking at it, we're both a training and a scientific measurement company. So we have a whole suite of techniques that are available to people through our training programs and a lot of stuff that's free online on our website, like heartmath.com, where people can learn simple techniques, Tim, that begin to put them in connection with what they already have inside, to give them that connection to their heart. So yeah, it takes techniques, it takes tools to make this happen. There's a naturalness to it that we all have, but to really amplify that and harness all the capacity that we can gain from being in touch with the heart, you got to have some tools. We have those tools, and we're well known for that as well. Practical, simple tools that people can use to make that connection and then apply it in whatever it is they're doing.
Doc Childre was obviously a key part of your work and your journey through this.
Yeah.
And he said he wasn't trying to be a mentor or teacher to you, but just focused on bringing out greatness in great people. What do you think he brought out in you?
Oh gosh. Well, Doc has always been about advancing people, helping them grow and to change, and to continue to evolve. That's just what he does. And so, with him being a friend and a mentor, he was always pushing me, pushing me through change, pushing me to do more things that would help me grow, pointing out that certain events in life that I would be challenged with were all for my growth, you know, and then at key points along the way where I might be at a decision point, he was there, to help me make that decision. He would never make it for me. He would never say, well, you need to do this or you need to do that. It would always be giving me angles of view that I could then draw from to make my own decision. That's a really beautiful thing for someone to do that with you and for you. And so whatever he brought out in me has led me to where I am today. Without that guidance from him, I certainly don't think I would have been able to, well, let's call it achieve whatever I've achieved now. A little Southern boy like me, coming out of the rock music world to end up being an author and all these other things. I mean, who'd figure? I think people that knew me many, many years ago probably find it hard to believe. He's that guy now, So I think that's a lot of that's due to the guidance Doc gave me, and then also to me having to have the meaningfulness to apply what he was offering. We all get things in life that can help us. All get, there's people or things we see or read or situations we're involved in that can help us grow. But at the end of the day, it's still about what we do. Whether we do it
Yeah.
or we don't, right? So it comes down to that. It's a self-empowered process, really.
What were those initial questions or conversations like between the two of you that really facilitated, like, hey, we should be exploring more into the heart here?
Gosh, I'll have to go back a long way in memory for that. It's been a long time since we had those conversations. I don't know if I can definitively answer that. As were the conversations like? It was ongoing. It was really about things like pushing past emotional resistances. Getting past some of the raw ambition and starting to align more with maybe what your true mission is, which may not be what your mind thinks it is. Learning to discriminate, those kind of things would be subjects that we would talk about. Certainly looking at how to work out conflicts, how to go through certain things, would be that, a more heart-centric approach to doing it that way. Maybe I can remember a time when I was involved in something that was really highly emotionally charged and everything, and trying to get it worked out. And he said something real simple to me, like simple, but powerful. Well, isn't there a kinder way to work that out? Just a little symbol of it. You shift positions. Okay, now I'm going to try to do this kindly instead of, I'm not going to let them push me around. And, this is not the way people do things. And this isn't fair. So I'm going to have to straighten that out and all that. He said, look, just cut through all that. Isn't there a kinder way to deal with this? And just that one moment of clarity at least began to redirect that energy to where I began to look at kinder solutions to working something out rather than the standard third dimensional human conscious program of you push your way through it. So learning to surrender in certain ways was something we used to have conversations about. I will give you one quick story that I just remembered. I did write about it in the book, The Heart Math Solution, that he and I wrote together. But it was when I had a girlfriend back when I was in my early 20s, and we'd been together for a long time, like 4 years. And I was in the music business. Honestly, I wasn't really treating her like I should, and one day she went to work at a summer camp somewhere. And one day I got a letter from her saying that the guy who runs the camp and her had fallen into a relationship. And that she didn't know what to exactly do with me, but that she was attracted to this other guy, right? So my vanity immediately flared up, and I'm going to have to take care of this. So I asked her to come see me, and she did. And when she came, we had that moment of connection that you have based on the past emotions that you've experienced and all that. And so in the height of that emotional exchange, I asked her to marry me. And she said, wow, that's a level of commitment I've never expected from you. I'm really going to have to think about this. And then when she left, interestingly enough, Doc shows up at my house the next day, asked me what's been going on, and I told him. And I told him what had happened. And what he said to me was profound. He said, well, you know what? If I were you, I'd call her back and I'd release her from that, because it's really pushing her into a corner. And even if she makes the decision to take you up on the marriage offer, it may not be what is really highest best there. You need to give her the freedom to do that. And if you really want to find out if it's real or not, you need to call her and tell her, hey, that's not any pressure on you at all with any of that. You're off the hook on that. And he said, if she comes back to you, it's going to be real.
Mm.
But if she doesn't, then you'll know that, and you just need to move on. And I did it. And she didn't come back. And she's married to that guy today.
Wow.
So that was her direction. It made sense, right?
Yeah.
And that's a long story, but it's an example. If you asked about dialogues we may have had, and that was one that was an important at that point in my life thing, because I could have pushed that and forced it and all that kind of thing, and then where would that have led?
Wow, that's an incredible story. And that happened all before you dove deeper into the research of the heart that you guys were doing?
That was before heart math. I mean, I go back with Doc before
Yeah.
there ever was a heart math. Prehistoric heart math.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, Diving deeper into the tangibles, like we were talking about at the start, how people can be misinformed or just have like a misunderstanding of the heart. Three major things that I find really fascinating about the work that you do, and really emphasize about the heart that people know, is that the heart has a nervous system. And in the early 80s, it was reclassified as a hormonal gland. And it's also the body's most powerful electrical organ. Why do those discoveries matter for how we understand the heart's influence on the body, and even, like we say, the energy that we feel from people?
Well, first of all, I'm going to applaud you for doing your research before our time together today. So you studied that pretty good. Early on, Tim, we were looking, we felt that the heart was doing more than pumping blood. We wanted to know what. So we began to look at it. We found literature sort of scattered out through the research literature, showing that the heart was acting as, independent of the brain and the mind. It was doing physiological things that it shouldn't be doing, independent of what the brain would normally be directing it to do, implying it had an intelligence. So our scientists began to look at that, and what they found is that the heart was communicating with the brain and the rest of the body, and it was doing it in four ways. You've touched on those four ways. First of all, there was a neurological communication, and what they found is that there was a field relatively unknown, but a real scientific medical field called neurocardiology, and that there had been books written about it, about this nervous system in the heart, and that the nervous system in the heart was the most sophisticated part of the nervous system we have, other than the brain and the head. And it was referred to in the books written about it as the little brain in the heart. So this nervous system is sending information to the brain. It's kind of goes, it starts here in the heart, it travels up through the nervous system into the brain. It comes in through the lower centers of the brain, what's called the medulla. But then it goes on. It goes into the mid-level brain, where a lot of our emotional processing takes place, and then goes all the way up into the higher perceptual centers of the brain, the neocortex. So you have this information going from the heart back to the brain. Now, the brain does send information to the heart. It's mostly timing information, helping to control the timing of the heartbeat. But as scientists mapped out this communication taking place, they could see clearly that the heart was sending a lot more information to the brain than it was receiving from the brain. So there's this conversation happening neurologically between the heart and the brain, and the heart's doing most of the talking. And that's the first way. The second way you didn't mention, but I'll throw it in there, it's a biophysical communication, it's called. When the heart pumps blood, it basically squeezes and pushes the blood through the veins and arteries, creates a wave of energy that pushes the blood. And that's called a blood pressure wave. Now, the blood pressure wave does travel throughout our entire body. It's how blood gets everywhere, to your earlobe or your big toe or whatever. The blood pressure wave is carrying that blood flow. Blood pressure waves change all the time depending upon how the heart is beating. The rhythmic beating changes in the heart are changing the blood pressure wave. Changes in the blood pressure wave influence other parts of the body. For example, the electrical activity in our brains is synchronized to the blood pressure wave. So when the blood pressure wave changes, electrical activity changes. There's your second way, biophysical. The third way you did mention, one of these things that I like to call today a who knew. Back in 1983, the heart was reclassified as being part of our hormonal system. So now they were seeing it as cardiovascular organ and hormonal gland. The reason for that is they discovered it produced hormones. One of those was called, for example, oxytocin. And oxytocin is a very regenerative hormone produced in greater amounts when people are in a loving state, like, say, a mother with a young baby, or when you're with your pet or something. You naturally produce more of this regenerative hormone. And they found that the heart was producing a lot of oxytocin, for example. So the heart was producing hormones, and that's a biochemical communication. Today, not just through our research, which is extensive, there's over 400 published research papers on heart math. But many researchers have looked into all of this, and so it's clearly understood that these communication pathways exist and are real and a very important part of our physiology. The fourth way is where it really gets interesting. The heart is electrical in nature. It's an electrical organ. When we go to a doctor, the doctor says, I'm going to do your electrocardiogram. What do they just say? Electrocardiogram. They put electrodes on your chest, and they're measuring an electrical signal produced by the heart. Well, it turns out that the heart's producing a lot of electricity. It's by far the strongest source of bioelectricity in our bodies, about 40 to 60 times stronger than the second most powerful source of bioelectricity, which is our brain. So it produces enough bioelectricity that it creates a magnetic field. And that field, measured with the most conservative equipment that you can measure magnetic fields with, it's called magnetometers, can be detected about 3 feet, or for those of you that are listening from other countries, about a meter outside the body. And that field surrounds us in 360 degrees. So we got this field around us right now, okay? Everybody's producing one. So as we began to look at the field, we found out that the information in the field changed depending upon what we were feeling. If we were feeling anger and frustration or sadness or those kind of feelings, it produced sort of an incoherent frequency pattern in the field. Conversely, if we're experiencing some of the emotional states that have been associated with heart, like we're feeling more appreciation or more care or more love or more kindness, the field would change. It would be a more coherent, ordered energy pattern in the field. Now, why is this important? It's important because, first of all, we're broadcasting that information, those frequencies, to our bodies. Every cell in our body was being bathed in this field. I would rather bathe my cells in something that's coherent rather than incoherent. But we're also communicating it outside the body. We're broadcasting through the magnetic field. So whatever we're feeling is being broadcast. And we sense fields. Everybody does. Every living system produces the field, by the way. And so we are constantly exchanging information at unseen levels. Somebody, you can be in a conversation anytime with somebody. You can ask them a question. Hey, you want to get together later tonight? They say, yeah, So their words said one thing, but you sense, wait a minute, I don't think it's really a yeah, right? And so you get the feeling there, and you're starting to pick up on something else. It could be that it's coming through our exchange of information through the magnetic field. Now, I hope our listeners are not getting too confused here, but I'll take it one more level. That field being measured up to 3 feet outside the body is being measured with very conservative equipment. Scientists believe that field goes much further than 3 feet. It could be really big in terms of how far the field actually goes. And we at HeartMath have been doing non-local research experiments at times. And additionally, when you introduce, we're looking at all this through normal physics right now. But if you introduce the understandings of quantum physics, you get another perspective. I'm don't know that much about quantum physics, but I do know a couple of things. One is that when you enter the world of quantum physics, you remove some of the normal boundaries of time and of space. They're not the same. They go away. So if you were to look at the heart's field through the lens of quantum physics, it could be almost infinite. It could be something that's connecting us to, the universe itself from that perspective. So the heart's field is where the exciting stuff happens for me in this research because it goes into those type of perspectives and understandings. But there are your four ways: biophysical, biochemical, nervous system in the heart, and the energetic field produced by the heart. Now you see a picture of the heart is doing a lot more than pumping blood.
Yeah, we have such a simplified understanding, it seems like, from a physiological level of what the heart is, and which is why I think your work is so important. I mean, you could have called this heart focus, heart regulation. Why was coherence the word that you guys fell on? Like, why do you think coherence displays this the best?
Well, what our scientific teams have explained to me is that coherence is like when all the systems are working together. And they have other more fancier terms for that. When all the basic systems of any system, the components in that system are working together, it's called coherence. It's a coherent factor in that. It could
Hmm.
be a watch, or it could be a work team, or it could be a football team. It can be, a lot of things. When all the parts of a system are working efficiently, you enter a state of coherence. So, in our reference to that, when we refer to coherence, sometimes we call it heart coherence. It's when all the major body systems are working together harmoniously. They're all synchronized to the rhythmic beating patterns of the heart. Like the heart's at the master of it all, master controller. And all the systems are aligned with that. And those systems are things like digestion, respiration, hormonal response, immune system response, brain function, all of that, nervous system, all sync up. Now, when we hit that place where it's all synced up, what we've done is we've entered into a high performance state. Less energy is being wasted. Uh, we measured things like for athletes, like reaction speed time improves. Visual field increases. It's also a very healthy state. It's good for the physical heart and for the nervous system. And when we're in a higher coherent state, the body's releasing more of the hormones into our system that regenerate us. So it's a very healthy state. Um, so one of the goals of heart math training and the measurement we have in our app is learning how to increase our coherence levels. There's an additional benefit that's psychological. To enter a high coherent state, we have to be attempting to activate a regenerative positive emotion, like feeling more appreciation, care, love, kindness that I mentioned earlier. Once we do it and we hit that place inside where things sync up, then those type of emotions start to flow. They become easier to access. So we start living life from those type of feelings and emotions. And when we do, life's different. Um, Simple, you mean anybody listening right now, do you feel better about life when you're complaining and upset or when you're feeling appreciation? This is 1 + 1 = 2 there, right? So we want more of that as we experience life. Coherence opens the door for that. It's like a boom, opening the doorway into the flow of this type of emotions through us that add to the fulfillment of our life experience.
Do you feel like heart coherence lives at the intersection between what we've been talking about with the physiological and what we started with about having a more mystical, metaphorical, poetic sense of the heart? Like, do you see that as like a harmonization between the two?
I love your characterization, the intersection. Answer to your question is yes. You know, when we're in a high coherent state, I won't be able to just lay out a scientific research study that proves this point that I'm going to make now. It opens us up to where more of our true higher self, people call it different things. They call it spirit, they call it higher self, they call it a lot of things. When we hit that coherent state, more of that part of what we truly are begins to download
Mm.
into our humanness. That's when the access opens up. That's when we become something more than our ordinary self. That's when we become our very best self. And that intersection does happen when we sync everything up through the heart.
Something that you mentioned earlier, and I've heard you talk about it in different interviews as well, is about, heart coherence and heart math. It's about bringing a heart-based system into a relatively heartless world, and I
Yeah.
find that really fascinating. Do you feel like heart coherence is something that people are innately born with and it's part of their natural self, and more like societal programming programs it out of us? Or what's your understanding there?
That's exactly right. We're born with it, and we have the opportunity to cultivate it, right, and grow it. But yeah, the naturalness of it is there from the very beginning. Uh, Life begins to program it out of us. We begin to model the behaviors that are around us. Uh, our educational systems, as much as I respect that, push a lot of ambition, and success and things like that. And we begin to lose that connection to something deeper. Uh, I love to observe children and how they process certain things more from the heart than from the head. Um, I guess a good example might be you could have two children at school and they're playing on the playground. They get into a little scuffle, teacher breaks it up, whatever. 5 minutes later, they're playing again. uh, get two adults, all they have to do is have one crossword and in a meeting, and next thing you know, they're enemies for life, right? It's like, where's the flexibility in that? What's the difference? That childlike spirit, which is connected to the heart. Also, the curiosity that children have, how they can see and play with things and be entertained by stuff. It's just that open heartedness in them. And we do lose it over time through just the programming of life and societal programming. The good news is we can make that reconnection, and it's easier than people think. And that's what we're all about here at HeartMath is tools, techniques, technology, a lot of different angles that we do it through to help people do what? To help reconnect with something they were born with, something they already have inside, and something that they need right now more than ever to live in this world we're in.
Yeah, I feel like all of us are trying to tap into our mind, and I feel like that's become the main societal thing, whether it's through meditation or breath work or just different types of wellness routines. I feel like it's always very head focused. And I think what we're taught is that we should just, if we want to have a strong mind, we should just directly focus on our mind. But how do you see the best way of interacting with your mind actually being through your heart and starting in the heart?
Well, first, let me say that some of the things you mentioned, I respect. I'm for anything that's helping people right now, for anything that's helping take people a little deeper within themselves. So all the things that are out there, the biohacking stuff, the mindfulness, all the various things people are doing, I'm cool with all that. And heart doesn't have to compete with that. Sometimes what I tell people is if something you're doing is working, then keep doing it. But try adding some heart to it, see if it doesn't improve it. You don't lose anything by adding some of the qualities of the heart to whatever you're doing. And so I think it's important to do that. What I would say is that the inclusion of heart in all these things enhances whatever someone's doing. So it isn't a competition between the mind and the heart or the brain and the heart. It's like we're an integrated system. They work together. So I think what's happened though is that people don't add enough heart into things. And that's the part of the problem. Mind is a beautiful thing. It's a standard term. The mind's a beautiful thing, but when it's not aligned with something deeper, it can run crazy. And it just it just works better when that heart's involved in the process there. And I think that like I said, you don't lose anything by saying, okay, let me put a little more heart into this. Let me slow things down. Let me add a little love, a little kindness, a little care into the process here. And guess who wins on that? The mind. The mind's a big winner. It gets new information, new fuel, new ways of looking at things. It appreciates it. The mind enjoys it. The mind wants to be connected to the heart. So a mind under the guidance of the heart or connected to the heart performs amazing things.
Yeah, and I think what's so important about your work and what this conversation has largely been about is that, listening to your heart, being aligned with your heart, that's not just a poetic or anecdotal saying. Like that is pragmatic, and there's, science and concrete findings behind that.
That's right. And what's also happening too, Tim, is that that's really on the rise right now. Whether it's through heart math or something else. I mean, heart is becoming more infused into the world right now. In some ways, I've said it before in interviews. I think it's heart time on the planet. This is part of what I would call. I'll use a big term now for a little Southern guy, but the evolutionary imperative of our time. is a reemergence of heart, right? It's part of the process. It's part of the high-speed evolution that we're going through, where consciousness and people are actually changing. So all around the world, people are getting onto this, through a variety of methods that are happening. One of the things that we are trying to help with and facilitate here at HeartMath, we call it helping love go viral.
Mm.
Let's get helping love go viral going. It's like movements are not something that you create. They're something that happen, but you can certainly seed, the playing field for a movement to occur. A movement I want to see is more people in practical ways, nothing grandiose, but just practical ways, beginning to demonstrate more of the qualities of the heart. As Doc Childre has said to me many times, the next level for human consciousness is to learn to get along with each other better.
Mm.
Takes the grandioseness out of it. Just we got to learn to get along. Well, what does that mean? We got to learn to begin to dissolve some of the separation, to begin to embrace the differences that we have, so that people don't see each other through the lens of us and them quite so much, and that needs to happen at the individual level, certainly in the systemic level, and certainly at the global level. So getting along doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that people do, say, or whatever, or their belief systems, but you don't have to judge it as hard either. You can be more neutral about that, allowing people to be people, allowing them to have their own belief systems, and don't have to try to make them like yours, maintaining your own belief system while not overly judging other people's, right? And that takes some practice. I don't think you get that done without heart. I don't think you get that done without love. That's what dissolves this stuff. As long as the mind is running the show with that connection to that, it's always going to find the fault. It's always going to find the reason to separate. It's always going to assign the problems that we are experiencing personally and the global problems to somebody else. I've said this before. There's one group of people in the world that creates the whole. Every problem in the world today is being created by one group of people. It's a group of people called they.
Yeah, that's a good point.
They are.
Yeah.
So we got to get the they thing reduced some. None of it's going to happen overnight, but we can take important steps, and it is happening. We see a lot of bad news. We see it all the time, and the world's problems are definitely on full display. But when I step back, I see hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people who've already started making choices, adopting different values, wanting something different, not wanting to be in the same old patterns that they once were in, right? I see the desire for that on the increase. So while the problems are increasing, so is something else. And we are really reinventing ourselves. The human being is actually reinventing themselves. And it's happening pretty quick. Major shifts are occurring that we'll see the outcome of within 2 or 3 generations. And we're right in the middle of it now. It's already been happening. So a couple of generations from now, this place is going to be different. And guys like you are going to be a part of that, making a difference.
I appreciate you
Not
saying
throwing a
that.
lot of responsibility on you tonight, but
No, I appreciate that, and yeah, that's fascinating to hear. There's definitely, yeah, an evolution, and it'll be interesting to see how that evolution plays out in a lot of different ways, physically and physiologically, but then also mentally, emotionally, spiritually. There's another word that I would love to get your understanding and opinion on. Obviously, we've been talking about the heart from a physiological and a mystical sense. What are your thoughts on the word soul? And because I feel like that's 100% we understand that from a metaphorical and spiritual sense. What do you think that means, or what does that mean to you when, we use the word soul?
well, let me say this first. I can give a little bit on that, but and I'll say this first of all. The caveat to anyone listening: I'm not trying to push a book, but in the book Heart Intelligence, which is a heart math book, it's written by Doc Childre, and there's 3 contributing authors. I'm one of the other 3. Doc wrote some things about soul and about things like that in that book. And so if you really want to take a look at that and study it a little bit, other than what I might say today, that's a resource I'm saying is there. It's a book called Heart Intelligence. Um, Again, the soul is complex. We have something we call a larger self. And that could also be called the soul or whatever. And it's us in a larger form. And we're in these bodies with these personalities, based upon our life experiences, and yet there's something bigger of who we truly are. And it's nothing that I can honestly say I know. Part of the game of life is not to know. We might figure that out later, but in this life, you're playing a game in this life where you don't get to see everything. And as you play the game without having all that wide understanding, you're actually getting a huge amount of growth. And it's actually a big service. So it's part of having the blinders on is part of the game, right? But my belief is that we're bigger than personalities. We're bigger than all this body stuff, that we have massive intelligence accumulated over a long, long time. And what we're experiencing is a part of that. And that's us, Howard Martin, Tim, but there's something in each and every one of us that's much, much larger. And that could be called our soul. And what is happening, though, is that more of that part of ourselves, called soul or higher self or whatever, is becoming closer to our personality. The bridge between the two is squeezing in a little bit now, And so we're starting to get more glimpses of that within ourselves. And that's part of the evolution that we're going through right now. There's a lot to be gained in that. It's really great news. But the part that's difficult is that it's often providing direction that just not what the personality necessarily would want to hear. And so it forces growth. It forces us to reevaluate. It forces us to challenge our positions and our beliefs. And so that's part of the growth process that's happening. As more of our true higher self or our soul begins to integrate more with who we are, perspectives change. And then we have to look at those perspectives and find ways to accept them, even though when they don't line up necessarily with what we thought, right? So it's a changing time for us. Ultimately, that's really, really good news, though, because now we're accessing more beyond the normal limitations of what we are as a personality. And we can make so much more out of life instead of just sort of mechanically walking through this life process. And, we can experience a lot more than we could have ever imagined. Just in a small scale for me, I could never have imagined early in my life having a life like I have and having experienced all the things that I've experienced. Impossible to see it. When we were starting Heart Math, started with a group of people dedicated to a mission of putting something together that could help people through changing times. Didn't have a lot of resources and all that to start with, and just had belief and going for it. And I remember thinking about what it could be like and everything. I could have never imagined a global organization with all these resources and all this other stuff that's happened with Heart Math, major brand in the transformational space and all these kind of things that, no way I could have seen that, right? If you ask me what's going to happen in the future, my little prediction of it would be about that big, right? Well, that's true of us as people, each and every one of us. The possibilities we have in our life to experience some amazing things is beyond what we can imagine. And that does not mean we're all going to become rich and famous and all that. I'm talking about meaningful experiences, meaningful life experiences. The possibilities on that are almost limitless on what we can experience and achieve in the time that we have here. And I hope people hear that, they're watching our conversation tonight, because, with a little bit of extra meaningfulness applied to things. And I would say from my life's work, adding more heart to what you do and respecting the heart and doing what you can to learn more about it and about how to access it, that you can have a life that's beyond your imagination, beyond what you can possibly see.
Howard, I think that's a beautiful place to stop. Where should people go to learn more about you, your work, anything else you would want to share?
For me, I'm just like a lot of other people out there now. Google me and you'll find like tons of videos and stuff, from years gone by, live shows and the whole thing. It's all there. But for HeartMath, just go to heartmath.com or heartmath.org. We have a for-profit and a nonprofit. And nonprofit side has a lot of the scientific research. They do wonderful work for the underserved, families, schools, first responders, military, things like that. HeartMath Incorporated is where heartmath.com is. Lots of resources there. The technology understanding is there. Many, many things are there. And that's a way to do it. So there all the time. There are free programs that we offer. There are webinars and stuff that we do. There's lots of ways in which people can participate. People that really want to do it can actually be certified to teach HeartMath as a coach or as a trainer. Those programs are available. If you're a health professional, we have a whole health professional side to what we do of integrating HeartMath science and techniques and understanding into medical practice, both psychological and physiological. All that and more is there on the heartmath.com website. Lastly, occasionally we have live events. We sponsor, not just ones that we get paid to speak at. We're having one in November on the island of Crete. HeartMath European Symposium. It's going to be awesome. I'll be one of the speakers. Dr. Deborah Rosman, the CEO of HeartMath, will be there. Dr. Roland McCready, Director of Research, there virtually. A famous author, a friend of mine named Lynn McTaggart, who does the Power of 8 work, is going to be with us. And people are going to work through a process for 4 days to unfold their own heart's code, a code and an access into this thing called heart. And they got cool things they're adding into that, like you get your own heart code passport and some other fun things. And it's going to be done in a place like Crete,
Yeah.
And then later next year, we'll do the annual HeartMath event that we do here. We're in California. We're near Santa Cruz. And so next year we'll be in Santa Cruz with that. So there are ways to come to live events and experience it with people who are similar in interest. I've laid out a lot right there. I don't want to confuse anybody anymore. Saying there are a lot of really interesting options for you if this conversation we've had has inspired you or made you curious.
Awesome. Yeah, and I love what you said right at the end there. We can't comprehend what we're capable of, and the thought that I think I would say based off of that is because those types of things live deep in the heart rather than the mind.
That's right. And again, I've got more to go. I'm always in a growth mode, but for me, thinking about where I started and where I am today, if it happened to me, it can happen for others. And that's part of what motivates me is whatever it is for somebody else. But I want people to have the fulfillment that I think they have coming to them. And so
Awesome.
I do what I can to help them do that.
Awesome. Great talking with you today.
Tim, thank you for having me. I wish you all the very best, and thanks for doing what you do to have a program like this and to be sharing information with people. It all counts. It all helps. Appreciate you, bro.